Hello. It has been quite a while since I have seen you, since you've seen me. I kind of fell into a reading slump by the end of the year, so I was planning to do a wrap up of October, November, and December all in one, but I've decided to not do that. I just don't have time for that anymore, and there are so many other videos that I want to do at the beginning of 2022, including this one that you are watching. So I'm not going to do a wrap up of the last fourth of my year of reading. Also too, I was on vacation. I've been sick. I still am a little bit sick, but we're trying our best. Also, the hair was not supposed to look like this. I was trying out some new curling products and didn't really do a good job. So hopefully the hair is not too bad or too distracting, but it's like the end pieces were very curly and then the top pieces were not curly. I don't understand what happened, but whatever. We're gonna ignore it, and we're gonna talk about all the books that I read for the entire year of 2021, right? Yes, okay. But let's start talking about my 2021 year of reading, how it went. So I think first what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to list every single book that I read in 2021 and then give their star rating. I'm doing that because I usually like to watch those types of videos. I know not everyone does, so if you don't, I will put a timestamp down below to where you can skip that and just go straight to the second half of this video, which will be me talking about all the statistics with my reading of 2021. Now, 2021 was definitely my best year of reading ever in my life. I don't know what happened, but I went way overboard. I read 147 books. I tried to get to 150, but I just really was in a reading slump the last quarter of the year, and I couldn't quite get it to 150, but I did read 147 books, which is pretty dang good, so pat on the back, especially with my goal being 100. I surpassed it, so I'm very happy about that. So now let me show you every single book that I read, and I'm going to show them in order of when I read them, starting with the first book all the way down to the last book that I read. Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad by Austin Kleon. I gave this 4 stars. Weird Things Customers Say in Bookstores by Jen Campbell. I did not rate this. Why the Last Man, Book 1 by Brian K. Vaughan, Pia Guerra, and Jose Marzan Jr. I gave this 5 stars. Julie and the Phantoms, The Edge of Great by Mikkel Ostow. I gave this 2 stars. I Must Belong Somewhere by Dawn Lanuza. I gave this 3 stars. A River in Darkness, One Man's Escape from North Korea by Masaji Ishikawa. I gave this 5 stars. Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli. I gave this 3 stars. Love Creekwood by Becky Albertalli. I gave 2 stars. Why the Last Man, Book 2 by Brian K. Vaughan, Jose Marzan Jr., Pia Guerra, and Goran Parlov. I gave 4 stars. Roman and Jewel by Dana L. Davis. I gave 3 stars. Why the Last Man, Book 3 by Brian K. Vaughan, Jose Marzan Jr., Pia Guerra, and Goran Suduka. I gave 4 stars. The Dating Plan by Sarah Desai. I gave 3 stars. Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. I gave 3 stars. Why the Last Man, Book 4 by Brian K. Vaughan, Jose Marzan Jr., Pia Guerra, and Goran Suduka. I gave 3 stars. Why the Last Man, Book 5 by Brian K. Vaughan, Pia Guerra, Jose Marzan Jr., and Goran Suduka. I gave 5 stars. A Complicated Love Story Set in Space by Sean David Hutchinson. I gave 4 stars. Shine Your Icy Crown by Amanda Lovelace. I gave 4 stars. I Am the Messenger by Marcus Zusak. I gave 3 stars. Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho, or Acho, I think it's Acho. I gave this 4 stars. Unchosen by Catherine Blair. I gave 5 stars. The Tao Te Ching by Lao Su. I gave 3 stars. Paper Girls Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, and Jared K. Fletcher. I gave 4 stars. The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. I gave 4 stars. Paper Girls Volume 2 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, and Jared K. Fletcher. I gave 4 stars. The Sweetest Kind of Poison by Katie Weismer. I gave 4 stars. Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. I gave this 2 stars. Paper Girls Volume 3 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, and Jared K. Fletcher. I gave this 4 stars. The Project by Courtney Summers, I gave 3 stars. Paper Girls Volume 4 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, and Jerry Kade Fletcher, I gave 4 stars. Paper Girls Volume 5 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, Jerry Kade Fletcher, I gave 4 stars. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, I gave 3 stars. Paper Girls Volume 6 by Brian K. Vaughan, Cliff Chiang, Matt Wilson, and Jerry Kade Fletcher, I gave 3 stars. Pillow Thoughts by Courtney Peppernell, I gave 5 stars. The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, I gave 4 stars. Millenniagram, the Enneagram Guide for Discovering Your Truest, Baddest Self by Hannah Pash. I did not rate this one. Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. I DNF'd this, but I gave it 2 stars. The Truth About Magic by Atticus. I gave 2 stars. The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. I gave this 3 stars. Beneath the Moon by Yoshi Yoshitani, I gave this 5 stars. Milk and Vine 2 by Adam Gasoweski and Emily Beck, I did not rate this. Pillow Thoughts 2, Healing the Heart by Courtney Peppernell, I gave this 4 stars. Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, I gave 3 stars. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, I gave 5 stars. Can't Take That Away by Stephen Salvatore, I gave 4 stars. The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, I gave 5 stars. Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley, I gave 4 stars. 1000 Paper Cranes by Takayuki Ishii, I gave 4 stars. Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas, I gave 4 stars. All You Need Is Love by Tanya Guerrero, I gave 4 stars. Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe, I gave 5 stars. Pillow Thoughts 3, Mending the Mind by Courtney Peppernell, I gave 5 stars. Aru Shah and the City of Gold by Rashi Chakshi, I gave 4 stars. Broken in the Best Possible Way by Jenny Lawson, I gave 4 stars. King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo, I gave 3 stars. The Lives of Saints by Leigh Bardugo, I gave 3 stars. A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, I gave 3 stars. High School Musical, the musical, the series, the novelization, I gave 1 star. The Intimacy Experiment by Rosie Dannon, I gave 5 stars. Malice by Heather Walter, I gave 5 stars. Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I gave 4 stars. Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart, I DNF'd this, but I gave it 2 stars. How Far You've Come by Morgan Harper Nichols, I gave 4 stars. How Y'all Doing? Misadventures and Mischief from a Life Well Lived by Leslie Jordan, I gave 3 stars. In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens, I gave 4 stars. High School Musical, the musical, the series, the road trip by Melissa De La Cruz, I gave 2 stars. Iron Heart by Nina Varela, I gave 4 stars. Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, I did not rate this. 10 Truths and a Dare by Ashley Elston, I gave 3 stars. The Wicker King by Kay Ingram, I gave 3 stars. Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee, I gave 3 stars. I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver, I gave 4 stars. Talk Bookish to Me by, I think, Katie Bromley. I gave this 1 star and I also DNF'd it. Descender Volume 1, 10 stars by Jeff Lemire and Destin Nguyen. I gave this 4 stars. Descender Volume 2, Machine Moon by Jeff Lemire and Destin Nguyen, I gave 4 stars. Tokyo Ever After by Amikia Jean, I gave 4 stars. Somebody Give This Heart a Pen by Sophia Thacker, I gave 2 stars. Romeo and Juliet, the graphic novel edition by William Shakespeare as well as Spark Notes, I did not rate this. How to Become a Planet by Nicole Melleby, I gave this 4 stars. The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, I gave this 4 stars. Helium by Rudy Francisco, I gave 5 stars. Hunted by Megan Spooner, I gave 2 stars. The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer, I gave 5 stars. Crank Palace by James Dashner, I gave 4 stars. I'll Fly Away by Rudy Francisco, I gave 4 stars. Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, I gave 4 stars. Descender Volume 3, Singularities by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, I gave 4 stars. Darling by Kay Ingram, I gave 3 stars. Blackout by Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Ashley Woodfolk, and Nicola Yoon, I gave 4 stars. Descender Volume 4, Orbital Mechanics by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, I gave 4 stars. The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, I gave 4 stars. The Collected Poems of Emily Dickinson, I DNF'd this, but I gave it 1 star. The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas, I gave this 3 stars. Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo, I gave 4 stars. Descender Volume 5, Rise of the Robots by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, I gave this 4 stars. Survive the Night by Riley Sager, I gave 3 stars. Fierce Fairy Tales by Nikita Gill, I gave 5 stars. Descender Volume 6, The Machine War by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, I gave 4 stars. XOXO by Axio, I gave 5 stars. King Lear by William Shakespeare, I gave 3 stars. Curses by Lish McBride, I gave 4 stars. Sea of Strangers by Lang Leave, I gave 2 stars. Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, I gave 5 stars. The Bride Test by Helen Huang, I gave 3 stars. Julie and the Phantoms, Whatever Happens by Candace Buford, I gave 3 stars. Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman, I gave 5 stars. The Silver Blonde by Elizabeth Ross, I gave 4 stars. Where Hope Comes From by Nikita Gill, I gave 4 stars. Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman, I gave 5 stars. The Mismatch by Sarah Jaffrey, I gave 4 stars. The Heart Principle by Helen Huang, I gave 5 stars. The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, I gave 4 stars. Beach Read by Emily Henry, I gave 5 stars. Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I gave 3 stars. The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, I gave 3 stars. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, I gave 5 stars. The Love Hypothesis by Allie Hazelwood, I gave 5 stars. The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee, I gave 4 stars. The Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky by Mackenzie Lee, I gave 4 stars. Lumberjanes Volume 1, Beware the Kitten Holy by Noelle Stevenson, I gave 4 stars. Lumberjanes Volume 2, Friendship to the Max by Noelle Stevenson, I gave 4 stars. Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, I gave 5 stars. A Game of Fate by Scarlett St. Clair, I gave 3 stars. Eleanor Oliphant Is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, I gave 2 stars. Hamlet, the graphic novel edition by William Shakespeare and SparkNotes, I did not rate this. White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson, I gave 4 stars. Flower Crowns and Fearsome Things by Amanda Lovelace, I gave 4 stars. The X-Hex by Aaron Sterling, I gave 3 stars. A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow, I gave 4 stars. Verity by Colleen Hoover, I gave 2 stars. Fool Me Twice at Christmas by Camilla Islay, I gave 3 stars. Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Caw, I gave 2 stars. The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, I gave 4 stars. Well Matched by Jen DeLuca, I gave 5 stars. Die Volume 1 Fantasy Heartbreaker by Kieran Gillen, Stephanie Hans, Clayton Cowles, Ryan Hughes, and Chrissy Williams, I gave this 4 stars. And then Die Volume 2, Split the Party by Kieran Gillen, Stephanie Hans, Clayton Cowles, Ryan Hughes, and Chrissy Williams, I gave this 3 stars. The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox, I gave 4 stars. Who the F Are You by Huda Fahmy, I gave 5 stars. Macbeth, the graphic novel edition by William Shakespeare and SparkNotes, I did not rate this. The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare, I gave 3 stars. That Way Madness Lies, 15 of Shakespeare's most notable works reimagined, edited by Dahlia Adler, I gave this 3 stars. Oddball by Sarah Anderson, I gave 5 stars. Embodied, which is by a bunch of different authors, but edited by Wendy and Tyler Chin Tanner, I gave this 2 stars. Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman, I gave 2 stars. Pillow Thoughts 4, Stitching the Soul by Courtney Peppernell, I gave 5 stars. Oh, shoot. I was holding up the wrong one this whole time. Oh my god. Okay. This is The Lightning Thief. Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan is the next one I read. And I gave this 3 stars. Always in December by Emily Stone, I gave 3 stars. And then the very last book that I read was Christmas with Louisa May Alcott. It's a short story collection of Louisa May Alcott's short stories about Christmas. I think there are only 2 of them in here. A Christmas Dream and How It Came to Be True, and then also How It All Happened. And I did not read this. But those are all of the books that I read in the year of 2021. So now let's go to the stats. Can we also take a minute to appreciate how all the books I read perfectly fit on this bookshelf? Like, perfectly. Very exciting. Okay, stats are moving over to the couch because my back is hurting from sitting on the floor. So we're getting a nice comfy couch. I may have to talk a little louder so you can hear me though. But I've got all the stats on my computer because thankfully I discovered Book Roast and I discovered her CAWPILE style of rating and then also her spreadsheet. So her spreadsheet has been a huge help in keeping track of all of these statistics and just keeping track of my entire reading life. So thank you, Book Roast. I also just downloaded the 2022 version of the spreadsheet and it is just, oh, it makes me so excited and so happy because the new one is, there's just more to it this year. So get ready for more stats next year. So obviously our first stat, I read 147 books. But if we're not including the books that I didn't finish, then it's 143 books that I read. I did take a picture of all of my books per month in their own like bar graph version, I guess. I did like a physical bar graph, but when I did that, it kind of looked different than the actual bar graph that I have on the spreadsheet. But first, let me show you the months. So this is what it looks like for months. My best reading month, books-wise, was definitely January with 20 books, and the worst was November with 4 books. But overall, I did pretty well. I feel like my average amount of books that I read was like 13. Now, if we compare that to pages, it looks a little different, but it's still quite the same. My best month was still January. I can't remember the exact amount of pages, but I know it's 5,000 something. And then my worst month was still November. I only read 810 pages. But total, I did very well. I read 38,526 pages, which is just incredible. My reading method, most of my reading is physical, but this year I did start audiobooks for the very first time. So 76.2% of my reading was physical, while 23.8% of my reading was mixed media, so audiobook and physical kind of like interchanging. Adding in the audiobooks definitely helped me read a lot more this year. Hello. I also realized from this angle, you can see both of my calendars and they're both for December of 2021. I have not changed my calendars yet, but I am editing the video right now, and I completely forgot a statistic that I kept track of, and that was paperbacks versus hardcovers, because most of my reading is physical. Actually, pretty much all of it is physical. It's just some books have an audiobook here and there. So I kept track of how many paperbacks and how many hardcovers, and so here is a pie chart to show you what that looks like. I do prefer paperbacks, so 54% of my reading was paperbacks, and then 46% hardcover. I did read more hardcovers in 2021 than I have in past years, so that, I will say, is a lot bigger than it usually is, just because I do prefer paperbacks so much. I know most people prefer hardcovers, but I prefer paperbacks. They're smaller, they're easier to hold in one hand. So anyway, that's that stat. Back to other Ellens. The genre. I read 13 different genres. Here is the pie chart. And the one I read from the most was fantasy with 17.7%, and then 15% romance, and then 14.3% poetry. And then tied for 4th place is contemporary and science fiction with 13.6%. And then 5th place is nonfiction with 8.8%. I'm a little upset by that one. I read a good amount of nonfiction in the beginning, and then it dwindled, and then I stopped reading nonfiction. The genres I read from the least were humor, short story, and mystery. They both were 1.4%, which makes sense for me. My favorite genres are fantasy, romance, and nonfiction. So nonfiction, I'm surprised, is as low as it is, because those are my top 3 genres. But next, we want to look at the length of the books. Most of the books I read are between 300 and 350 pages, with 20.4% of my reading being within that length. And then 2nd place was 100 to 150 pages with 19%. And then we have 250 to 300, 200 to 250, and then 150 to 200. So I kind of stay within like that average page length. So 850 to 900, 600 to 650, and 550 to 600. I only read 1 book for each of those lengths. Big book fear is real. The shortest book I read was The Hill We Climb with 29 pages. And then the longest book that I read was Queen of Air and Darkness with 893 pages. Okay, so let's go into star rating. So obviously my lowest are 1 stars. I very rarely give out 1 stars, but I gave out 3 1 stars this year, so 2.2%. And then my 2 stars, it was 10.8%. And then 3 stars is 25.9%. And then most of my books were 4 stars with 41%. And then 5 stars were 20.1%. I'm actually very happy,
because I gave a lot of 5 stars, and I also very rarely give 5 stars. So with all those ratings combined, my average is 3.7, which is, I'm happy with that, okay? I feel like that's a good average to have. So I'm happy. Now, age categories, most of my books are adult books. 56.5% are adult, and then 35.4% are young adult, and then 8.2% are middle grade. I throw in a little middle grade here and there just to keep things interesting. Publication year, this is an interesting pie chart just because it's kind of a little bit hard to read because I read from so many different years. But obviously the main year was 2021. That was one of my main goals for 2021, was to read more new releases. So that's what I did. And obviously second place is 2020, and then 2019, and then 2018. So most of my readings were within the last like 5 or 4 years. But the oldest book that I read was actually written in BC times. It was written in 600 BC. At least that's what it's estimated to be, and that's the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Then the most recent book that I read, there's 2 of them because they both came out on the same day. That's Oddball by Sarah Anderson and Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman. They both came out December 7th of 2021. This one's not so interesting of a pie chart either, but how I got the book. So most of the books I read are books I own because I own so many books and I purchase so many books on my own. So 95.9% were books that I owned. 2% were books that were gifted to me, and then 2% were books that I borrowed. Now let's talk about some LGBTQ plus representation. I'm very disappointed in myself for this one. I was doing so well in the beginning of the year, and then it just like stopped happening for some reason. But here is the pie chart for the LGBTQ representation. 55% of my reading did not have LGBTQ plus representation. We're going to work on that for 2022. But 20%, the main character was LGBTQ+, and then 24%, it was just present within like a side character. And if we break down that LGBTQ+ rep, most of the books I read were lesbian. 37.9% lesbian, and then 27.3% gay. Next would be bisexual, 10.6%. Next would be 12.1% with multiple. So there wasn't just like one representation within the book. There were multiple different ones going on. And then 10.6% bisexual. We also have 4.5% transgender. We have 3% non-binary. We have 1.5% genderqueer, 1.5% pansexual, and 1.5% asexual. Okay, next I want to talk about series versus standalone. I mainly read standalone books, 59.2% to be exact, and then 40.8% were series. And then what I really liked tracking this year were how many series that I finished, and thankfully I finished 13 series this year. So let's go into stuff about the author. So first stat we have about the author is the author POC, which I am unhappy to say that unfortunately 64.6% was not POC, and then 34.7% was POC. There was one book that I did not know, could not find a picture of the author anywhere, couldn't find out any information about the author except the author's name. That was it. So I had to put unknown for that. And then the breakdown of those POC authors, I mainly read from Asian authors, 43.1% to be exact. And then 41.2% were Black authors, so coming in a very close second with that. And then 13.7% were Latinx. And lastly, 2%, aka one book, was Native American. Next, we have the gender of the authors. I mainly read from women authors, so 65.3% were written by women, 29.3% were written by men, 3.4% were written by a non-binary author, and then 2% were multiple authors, so more than just one gender. And the last stat that we had to talk about is the nationality of the authors. So I mainly read from American authors because I do live in America, but I was happy to see that I don't read just American authors, that I do read other nationalities. 14.3% were British, 6.1% were Canadian, 2.7% Australian, 2.7% Israeli. I did have one Malaysian author, one Italian author, 2 Scottish, 1 New Zealander, 2 Mexican, 2 unknown, 2 African, 2 Chinese, 2 Japanese, and 3 Filipino. So those are my stats for my books for this year. Thank you for coming to watch this video. I do also have a video that is just like this, but for my movies that I watched in the year 2021. So you can go check that out. And then I will be coming out with my top 10s. I know last year I did not come out with my top 10s, but I'm doing it this year, my top 10 books, my top 10 movies. So look out for those. And then also another video that I will be coming out with this month, hopefully. I will be doing a whole unhaul and reorganization of my bookshelves, and I figure I can just like vlog the whole experience. So be sure to check that out when it does come out. And I'm very excited because my bookshelves need to be cleaned. I need to get rid of some books. But yeah, so that is it for this video. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you again with more videos. Bye!